Good morning. Thanks for joining me today in our Unfolding the Word study. We're continuing in the midst of a study of 1 Peter. Today I'm going to be picking up our reading in chapter 3, verse 7. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. As you remember, if you've been with me now, we've been looking through 1 Peter, and particularly now in the 3rd chapter, we've been looking at the broad topic of countercultural marriage. The idea that as aliens, exiles in this world where God has scattered us, God is intending us to demonstrate a light in the darkness tied to the gospel, of course, but also tied to our lifestyle. The way that we live that reflects the kingdom over against the culture of the world. We've been looking at countercultural marriage. Verses 1 to 6 were focused on the wife and demonstrating in 5 different characteristics how the wife is meant to live and express her role in the framework of Christian marriage. Now today, we shift gears in the 7th verse, and we begin to discover a similar set of challenges to the Christian husband. So let's look at it together. Fair is fair. We examined the wife. Let's examine the husband. The bridge here in verse 7, likewise, husbands, is the same bridge we saw back in the beginning of the chapter in verse 1, likewise, wives. Now, likewise, what? If you remember when we were looking at wives, that phrase is tying us back into the preceding verses in the middle to end of chapter 2, which talk about a submission, an important orientation of adaptability and care about another and support of another. We saw a submission of believers to governing authorities. We saw submission of believers to employers and so forth. The wife is called upon to be submissive to her husband, and then we examine various ways in which that submissiveness and submissive spirit is shown. And the Greek word you remember was hupotasso, which, depending on the context, means to respect and obey, or to adapt, or to cooperate. It has that range of meanings to it. And the context, again, helps us to know what the primary idea is. Now, in this particular case, in talking about the Christian man, the Christian husband, he says, likewise, moving us back again to that submission, hupotasso concept. And he says, husbands, enter into your marriage, carry out your role with a submissive mindset. By the way, it's very similar to Ephesians chapter 5, where he says we are, in verse 21, to be submissive to one to the other, and then he goes and talks about the wife's role and the husband's role, and expressing how that submission is meant to look. God commands the husband to enter his marriage as a Christian husband now, understanding God's design for marriage, to enter his marriage with a submissive mindset. Now, a submissive mindset in this case is not the idea that you'll give in to the decisions of a wife. That's not the point, because remember, the hupotasso has a range of meanings depending on the context. We've already seen that the husband is meant to be the final say, the leader in the home. So the idea here isn't that you abandon being the leader, but what you do abandon is the idea that that you're a leader in an autocratic sort of way. No, we show submission mindset as men, hupotasso as men, in a different way. We demonstrate our commitment to adapt and to cooperate in the context of the relationship in different ways than the wife is called upon, or at least somewhat different ways. So let's look at these, because verse 7 introduces us to 5 characteristics of the Christian husband, all of which reflect and amplify what it means to have a submissive mindset. Let's look at the first of these. The submissive husband shows a submissive mindset, a hupotasso mindset, by living with his wife in an understanding way. That's the way the ESV translates this. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding sort of way. Now, this is a bit revolutionary. Was when it was written, and it's revolutionary today. Why? Because human culture, by and large, which is a question of power and strength and control, culture generally encourages men to be inconsiderate. Men are encouraged to live primarily for themselves. Men are encouraged to look at their wives as primarily there to serve them, not to interfere with them, but to serve them. But God calls upon a Christian man to have a completely different mindset about all of this. No, God says, no, the wife is not just there to serve you. I want you to have a different mindset altogether. And this mindset will involve two things. Number one, a commitment to live with your wife. And number two, a commitment to be understanding of your wife. Now let's look at each of these because they're both critical. Number one, a man is called upon in a submissive mindset to live with his wife. And the word live here means, it's a form of koinonia. It means to commit oneself to companionship, to the sharing of life. Back in Genesis chapter 2, when God created marriage, and by the way, he did it in the garden before sin was even in the picture, he created marriage because it was not good for man to be alone. And therefore, he created a covenant of companionship. The essential reason for the marriage was companionship, friendship between a husband and a wife. It is not good, God said, for man to be alone. And you're still alone, even if you live in the same house with someone, if you are not sharing life with that person. You don't just share a paycheck, you share your life. You approach life together. A husband is called upon by God with this idea of submission in his mind to choose friendship, companionship. A husband who refuses to be the true friend and companion to a wife is sinning before God, particularly the believer. It is a sin to refuse to be the friend and companion to the wife in your life. And by the way, my experience over the years has been that women are desiring that companionship. The primary culprit when companionship is not existing in the home is the husband. And so God says, listen, the first part of what I want you to do to shine like a light in the darkness is commit yourself to be the friend, the companion, the close confidant, facing life together with your wife. Secondly, he says, I want you to live with your wife in an understanding way. The understanding word here translates a form of the Greek word gnosis, which is referring to experiential knowledge. What's the idea? God says, I want you to be the companion of your wife. I want you to commit yourself to friendship and facing life together. And then I want you to commit yourself to getting to understand her, to know her in experience. Get to know her so well that you can truly be considerate of her, so that you can understand and act on what her needs are. Here's the point, and let's not miss it. God says, just as it is sin for a Christian husband to refuse to be the close friend and companion for the wife, it is also sin for a Christian husband not to commit to seeking to understand the woman that God has brought into his life. Marriage is a covenant of companionship. It has been since Genesis 2. God intends that model to be demonstrated in the framework of the world. A Christian man, therefore, is mandated by God to be the friend of his wife. Not just friendly, but the friend of his wife. And the Christian man is mandated by God, commanded by God, to gain an understanding of his wife, to commit himself to try to know her, and therefore to be able to be responsive to the true needs that exist in her life. Think for a minute what kind of revolutionary picture that is of relationships. Men, likewise, with the mentality of submission, hupatasso, that came out of the second chapter of 1 Peter, likewise, commit yourself to live with your wives in an understanding way. Can this be said of you this day? Renew before the Lord a commitment to pleasing Him in this regard. Join me tomorrow as we continue, Lord willing, in our study and discover yet more ways in which God commands the man to show that submissive attitude in the framework of the home. God bless.